Welcome.
Shalom. And welcome.
Welcome to Awakening Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chassia Uriel Steinbauer, the founder and director of this amazing institute, where we combine the synergy, the wisdom of two ancient traditions of Mussar and Judaism and Theravada Buddhism, particularly mindfulness. And we create mindfulness Mussar, right? Mussar mindfulness. And so we are delighted to have you here. Please allow yourselves to settle and arrive as we welcome people who are just showing up either on the Zoom link or in our live streaming. We're delighted to have you. So just take this moment to begin to welcome arriving, welcoming awareness, coming into this space as we settle and arrive and begin to learn and practice together. I'm delighted to have you here. So I always announce what date this is, what week this is, what sitting it is. This is our tradition. We are in our seventh sitting, our seventh weekly Torah portion that we started in the Jewish New Year at 5783. And it was yesterday's parsha. And in yesterday's parsha, we were in Vayeitzei. And it was the date was the Tet of Kislev, the 9th of Kislev, and December 3rd. Today, obviously, is Sunday, December 4th, Yud Kislev, the 10th of Kislev. We are delighted to have you here to really look at this Torah portion from the lens of Mussar Mindfulness and see what we can practice and learn around this, and then jump into a guided mindfulness meditation practice. So hopefully you've had a chance to study and look at this parsha, as is our tradition to do so the week before that Shabbat, that Sabbath. If you haven't, I always give a brief summary, and then I jump into our nikuda, our very important point that we want to pay time and attention to. Before we begin, we always begin with our kavanot, our intentions for today's practice. It's very important in our practice to have an intention, because it helps us guide our practice so that we know actually what are we aiming for, what are we seeking to do here and get out of this. So you see before you, if you are watching by video, you see before you three kavanot, three intentions that we say before every session. If you are listening on audio, I will be reading these. So if you're joining us on our podcast or in the Insight Timer latest awakening, you will hear it here. So we say before doing acts of caring for the self, which we see this time together in this practice on Sundays at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time, that we are caring for the self. This is what we're doing. And we say this is something I'm doing to strengthen my own soul in order to be of benefit to others in the future. Our practice is to care for ourselves so that we can be other-oriented, to serve others and God. The second one is before doing acts for others, which we see this practice doing. This is something I'm doing to strengthen my relationship to others, so I can be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need me. And finally, our third kavanah, our third intention, before doing acts to strengthen our relationship with the divine, which is what we're doing here also. This is something I'm doing to strengthen my relationship with the Creator, so I can be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need me. So may we merit that we fulfill these kavanot today in our practice as we jump in together. I want to say that there's a whole set of family and friends who are dedicating this learning today and even next meetings to my lovely daughter, which some of you know will be celebrating becoming a bat mitzvah on Shabbat, coming up on Vayishlach. And so this session and next are dedicated to this learning in honor of that. And I'm delighted to have you here to be able to engage in that and do that. Okay, our summary of Vayeitzei. I just want to honor first take a deep breath, that if you really studied this parsha and have been following along, this might be difficult. It might be starting to feel heavy. And that is okay if that is your experience. Why? Because we're getting into behavior of some of our ancestors that is unethical, that we would feel is even immoral at times. And it touches our buttons, it pushes us. And this is part of the practice, is to recognize when we are uncomfortable or we're triggered by behavior or the text. And then we become aware of it and accept it, and then we practice around it, okay? And that's what we're going to do today. I just want to start off by saying you're not alone. I've had many students this week say, oh, having a hard time with what's going on. So let's jump in. What are we having a hard time with? So as a summary, Yaakov, who, if you remember, is the second born in a twin relationship in utero, and his mother, Rivka. He's 17 years old. And if you might want to recall his unethical, immoral behavior, he, along with his Ima, his mother, Rivka, it's actually mostly her responsibility. She decides to deceive her blind husband in order to make sure that Yaakov receives the blessing that she thinks he should receive. So she has him dress up as his brother with fur on his body from an animal. She has him give game and give food that the father would like, so that he feels, satiated, so that he can bless his son. And she has her son lie to his father when the father says, who are you? Like, who is this? Are you sure that you're Esav? This whole conversation ensues. It's quite painful to witness and watch, particularly because we have this concept that you don't put a stumbling block before the blind. And I can't think of a more stumbling block than deceiving the blind, not giving them the full honest picture of who's actually speaking and who's before them, right? That you're lying, you're not being honest about who you are. Okay, Yaakov has just done this act with his mother, and his brother Esav comes home from actually hunting to bring home the food. His name is Esav. He is in so much pain and sadness and rage, anger, which is coming from the sadness, that he was not blessed, right? Not blessed first, okay? That the blessing was kind of stolen from his language is used. His father says he's come to deceive. So Yaakov, the mother overhears Esav, to give you this background, planning in his heart that he's going to kill his brother, okay? Obviously, that's not the case, as we know later on, because 20 years later, he has the opportunity to do so, and he doesn't. I want us to be aware that people say irrational things when they are completely hurt and angry. And Esav in that moment, I'm sure, was in that state. Okay, so what happens? Yaakov has to flee. The mother says, Rivka says, you have to leave, go to my brother, your uncle, go head north, so that I don't lose both of you in one day. That's what she says. That's her language. She doesn't want them to fight Esav and potentially one kill one or one kill both, or have that work out. Okay, so she says, you need to flee, you need to leave, and go to Lavan, my brother, your uncle. Okay, so Yaakov, just as a summary, starts heading by himself, a 17-year-old, all by himself, it seems, kind of exiled in a sense. It ends up being totally afraid and alone in the land. The sun goes down, he needs to sleep. He ends up dreaming of a sulam, a ladder, where up and down, on the ladder are angels going up and down. And even Hashem, God, is standing either upon him or upon the ladder or next to him. The language is ambiguous, and basically tells Yaakov in that moment that I'm here with you, I'm here to protect you, that your descendants and you are going to inherit this land, that you indeed are going to be the third patriarch. Okay, he hears this, he has this in a dream. The 17-year-old wakes up in absolute shock at the experience. He can't believe it. He said, I didn't know God was in this place. It's actually quite a really touchy and beautiful moment. It's also surprising. We'll touch upon that. Okay. So he has this dream, and the boy, the 7-year-old at that moment, feels much lighter on his feet. He feels, I'm being watched. I'm being protected. He gets up, actually says he lifts his feet, which is not the language usually for someone who starts walking on his path to head north to his uncle's. So he heads up, he continues on his journey. He finally meets Rachel at the well. He doesn't even know that he's arrived in the location where his uncle lives. And he ends up meeting Rachel, which is Lavan's second born daughter, the younger daughter. Okay, so it's a similar position of Yaakov, Rachel versus Esav and Leah, who the eldest is, who's the older one, and who's the younger, right? Yeah, although Rachel and Leah are not twins, there's just an older and a younger. So he meets her. He's so relieved that he's run into a relative. That's a sign that he's arrived. There's a great introduction between them. She brings him home, and he meets Lavan, of course, her father, his uncle, who, at the beginning really greets him well and is excited to see him. You might recall Lavan is essentially the patriarch, even though it should have been his father, Nahor, who greeted Abraham's servant a while ago, who came to find a wife for Yitzhak, who ended up being Rivka, right? The sister of Lavan. And so you have this Lavan who has this history with the Abraham and his family, okay? He knows them and is aware of them. So he ends up, the summary of the story is Yaakov ends up staying much longer than he planned with Lavan. He literally thought he was going to go for a short time until his brother's temper calmed down and his mother would call back for him. Sadly enough, the mother who sends him away in all her scheming and planning and deception, she says, I don't want to lose you both in one day. I'm sending you away and I'll call for you. When his anger calms down, she actually passes away before her son ever gets to see her again. And we have this betui, this idiom that we say in Jewish culture and in Hebrew that man plans and God laughs. And so here is a case where I don't think God's laughing, but this case where the mother was really trying to plan and control something. And when we attach ourselves to an outcome so much, there often ends up being suffering because of the attachment and control. So Yaakov ends up serving essentially almost as an indentured servant. He's definitely an indentured laborer. He gets hired by his uncle for 7 years to marry one of the daughters. He thinks he's going to marry Rachel. That's his first choice. The younger one, he ends up being deceived by Lavan, who hides and lies and has Leah be the one who marries him first. He's shocked at the deception. He can't believe it. And it is Lavan who reminds him through very specific language that the culture is that you don't do things for the younger before the elder. And the eldest gets married first, the eldest receives. Therefore, it's like the signal to wake up to Yaakov. Yeah, you don't get the birthright, you don't get the blessing, but you took in deception, and here you're being deceived. Okay, it's this family culture of habitual deception, and it's not healthy, and we're going to see this outcome of it. Okay, so he ends up saying, all right, I'm going to work 7 more years for you to marry Rachel. He marries her a week later. He's now married to 2 women who are sisters, which we both know in Jewish law ends up being not acceptable. You can't marry, nobody marries more than one woman now, but it used to be you can't even marry somebody's sister, right? So he marries her. He ends up actually marrying their concubines too, has many children, has 11 sons and 1 daughter, another son later on, obviously. That's later on in the next week's Parsha. But basically what happens is Lavan has keeps having conflict with Yaakov, and the 17-year-old boy begins to grow up almost because he has to. It's like that emergency situation where he's serving now as this indentured laborer, and he's forced to work for this bride price of both women. And he learns, we say in Mussar practice, Mussar Mindfulness, that you can practice on your own daily so you can be prepared for what life sends you, all the stimuli, right? All the both positive and negative or unpleasant and pleasant situations in life. Or life can bump into you, right? Things can happen and they will cause you to either sink or swim. They will cause you to have to grow and change. And that's what we witness here with Yaakov. He's a 17-year-old boy. Life gets thrown at him. He's kind of the sink or swim. He swims. He does the best he can. He makes mistakes along the way. He's our very human ancestor that gets recorded in the Torah, right? And very flawed, like most of us, like a human being, right? But in that flaw can be where we are triggered, because a lot of people expect the patriarchs and the ancestors to be like angelic, like perfect people who aren't human and don't make mistakes. And this is clearly not what we're seeing here. So if you notice that when you're studying and reading these parshas, that you're having a hard time with who's selected to be, that which passes on and ends up creating the Jewish people, as we know, you're not alone. It's a huge thing. So what happens? Lavan and Yaakov have this conflict throughout the whole 20 years of labor. He ends up doing not 14 years, an additional 6. They kind of deceive and manipulate one another until finally, we know this, Yaakov has a hard time with conflict, like most of us. Rather than face a conflict and communicate openly with someone, his habitual behavior is to run away, is to flee, like he did with his brother and his father. The same thing happens with Lavan. He tries once to request to leave. He asks for permission to leave. Lavan's not having it. Lavan manipulates him to stay. So finally, Yaakov, now a grown man, 37 years old, with large family, many wives, he leaves. He meets with his the 2 primary wives and gets their permission to escape and leave. So this is the background. Lavan finally actually chases them. You can tell he had the intention to do him harm, because it actually took God, Hashem, to come to him in a dream and say, don't do any harm or good to him. Like, don't touch Yaakov. And so when he shows up, he says, I had it in mind to do this to you, X, Y, Z, but your God told me not to do anything, and so I'm not going to. But it was really a difficult conflict and confirmation that Yaakov actually blew up. He finally has his moment of rage. He's so sick of Lavan's deception and behavior that he blows up, and we suddenly learn of all these injustices that have been bottling up in Yaakov, because he has a very hard time being balanced and managing conflict and his midot around it. He's someone that is not balanced in humility. He doesn't know how to take up his proper amount of space. So there's these extremes that happen, right? And so what we witness is him blowing up. They finally are able to come to some brit, a covenant that they will have reconciliation and separate. It's like a ceasefire. They agree not to cross each other's boundaries or lines. If you notice in these reconciliations and ceasefires, there's never really teshuvah. There's never really a full repentance and healing that people can actually get along and live together. Instead, they'll agree to live separately in peace. Okay, this is what we're witnessing. So this is the background of this parsha. And what I want to focus on here is just the paradox that is given to Yaakov from God when God speaks to him, who we're dealing with here and what that triggers in us, okay? So the 17-year-old boy, I want to go back to when he is on his own. He ends up having to go to sleep on a rock in the middle of nowhere that he thinks is nowhere, right? And the boy essentially is heading north to northern Mesopotamia. He was located at the beginning in southern Canaan. It's a very long journey, okay? And his character is going to be tested and his personality molded and transformed by experience over time, all right? So he's, God essentially speaks to him in this dream. And as I said earlier, God assures him of the continuity of the generation, that Yaakov is to become the third patriarch. But what the paradox is, he's told that he's going to inherit this land with his descendants. And the paradox is the boy is about to be exiled from the land. So here he's being told he's going to have this land and his descendants, and then he's exiled. He has to go out. He has to flee and run away. And so the title is affirmed, but there's something really odd there. There's also something, if you pay close attention to how God speaks to him, it's the first time that God promises to anyone, but particularly to one of the patriarchs, the ancestors, he promises to be there with him and protect him. And so, of course, in our mind, of course, the 17-year-old needs to hear this. They're alone in the middle of nowhere. And it's very frightening. He's also fleeing someone that's so angry at him, he wants to kill him. He's fleeing to a brother that I'm sure he's heard about from Rivka, right? His mother. So this is what he's given. And here's this paradox we're going to hold. So he's the first ancestor to exhibit any surprise at his initial experience of God, right? God's sudden revelation comes and he's surprised, right? He's like, I didn't know God was here. What's going on? Let's remember, he's 17. When Avraham encounters God and is told to leave his homeland, leave his country, leave his father's house, he was 75 years old. When Yitzhak encounters God and has finally that conversation with him of who he's going to be, what he's going to inherit, he's at least 40. Okay, so we're dealing with a child still. And I think we need to honor that, that's very part of the story. I think people forget that when they're looking at Yaakov, all right? So the paradoxes, if I'll continue, is that he basically asks for all that he's already been promised. So God promises him certain things, and then he comes back and he asks for them again. It's almost as if he's saying, I either don't trust fully, I'm too afraid, I don't know, this is a new relationship, but it's clearly there. And he doesn't really understand how this relationship with God works in some ways. This is part of his trial and his growth. But the other paradox is, here he's the one to have received the blessing from his Abba, from his father Yitzhak, where he was told that his brothers, like Esav and his brothers, would serve him and that they would bow to him. This is part of the whole bracha, the whole blessing. And this is the paradox, if you pay close attention in this parsha. Who is the person who actually serves others? It's Yaakov. He serves as an indentured laborer to Lavan. He ends up like claiming to Esav when he is finally reuniting with him when he's 37. He keeps calling himself your slave, your servant. I am your servant. I am your slave, over and over again. And he bows. He bows 7 times, complete full prostration to the ground in order to meet Esav. So here's the paradox. Here's the 17-year-old boy who went to great lengths with his mother, probably deeply uncomfortably, to steal the blessing that he's supposed to be the one that receives all this, right? He's going to receive Avraham, who passed away, his grandfather, all that wealth that was passed to Yitzhak, it'll be passed to him, the double portion, as the birthright, as the firstborn, even though he wasn't. And he receives this blessing of all this. And here, it's not the case in his real experience in his life. And so we live with that paradox. We're like, what's going on here? What is going on here? And I'm not saying there's a simple or easier answer, and maybe there shouldn't be. It's just for us to acknowledge that even in our own lives, if you feel that you have a strong relationship with the divine, and you feel that you have a purpose and you're here and you know what you're doing, that there's an element of so much we don't know. And that's part of our own humility, to be open that we can try to be agents, we can try to serve, but really there's just so much unknown, and it might be not only about us, obviously. Like if Yaakov is promised this for future descendants, and he's going to be established as the third patriarch, then it's obviously larger than him. Okay. So I finally want to go on to say, before we move into our practice more, there was a couple more things I wanted to touch base with you, which is essentially, I said he was a boy. Okay, the language I want to pay very close attention to when he was 17 and he arrives at the place, right? The language is so important in the Hebrew. He goes right here. Okay, so we're on chapter 28. We are on the 11th verse, okay, Yud Aleph. It says right here, Vayifga b'makom, okay, that it gets translated in the English that he arrived at this place, but Vayiga means that he bumped into, and not only bumped into, the makom, the place, actually bumps into him. The language used and to understand that verb is that the place itself kind of runs into him. And if you know anything about the language hamakom, we know in Hebrew that hamakom is also one of the names of the divine, of God. Okay, so we're kind of wondering, is this God bumping into him? Is this the place? Because the place is also holy. As we know, this is going to be this portal of this ladder of angels going up and down, and God's obviously standing there and communicating to him. It's a special place. Obviously, it's something he has to learn, but he's bumped into it. All right. And so that's the first. Remember, I told you he's someone who is going to have life happen to him, and then he's going to have to learn to pivot. All right. So here's the next part where he gets bumped into. What's the language used? It's unbelievable. Is that once he realizes that God's in this place, he actually does this beautiful thing where he says, I didn't know God was here. And he finds this place terrifying, but in that terrifying way that is both awe and fear, what we call yira. Like, right, he says, Ma nora hamakom hazeh. How terrible, how frightening, how amazing, all that combined together is this place. And he suddenly has tons of energy. The language actually used is Vayeitzei Yaakov reglav. He picks up his feet. Who picks up their feet when they're going to go walk on their journey? The boy, the 7-year-old, is so choleric in some ways, so excited, right, that he now has a lift. He finds the journey easier. He feels protected. He feels seen. His feet are directed. He has resolve. He has confidence, right? There's something really strong going on here. Now you have to remember, the boy at first was fleeing. He's terrified. It was all a reactivity. It was like, get out to save your life. And now he feels he has another purpose. It's not only get out to get your life, and he's supposedly going up to also find a spouse, but he suddenly has this new relationship with the divine and new information, and he's energized by that. Okay. So the last thing about bumping into that I'll say is, we know this from looking at this whole parsha and story, that Yaakov, as I said earlier, is someone who who bottles up his anger, his feeling of injustice, right? He's feeling what is done to him. He practices a lot of silence in reaction and response to things done to him or around him. And essentially, when it comes down to the last part, when we're looking at chapter 31, verses 36 through 43, where he has this counter charges, right, against Lavan, 20 years of suppressed anger at the basically kind of abuse and mistreatment find expression, right? He has this impassioned outpouring of what we might call righteous indignation, right? It gives us a lens as the witnesses into his life of this kind of hard life of trials and tribulations that he endured that maybe we weren't so aware of until this moment. But we also have to look at the poor boy's behavior, and he's not a poor boy anymore, right? He's 37. He has his imbalances. He doesn't manage anger well. He has a fear of conflict, which is part of the anger thing. And you know, in some ways we have to have compassion and try to understand why. He's coming from a culture, and it still exists today, unfortunately, where there's a lot of male on male violence, right? If we think about wars and other things that go on, he's, first he has a grandfather who's commanded to sacrifice his own father, Yitzhak. That's a form of male on male violence. We don't see it that way because we see God as commanding it, but that had the potential, right, of really having, well, first of all, Yaakov wouldn't even be alive, right? So there's that history, right? If we're going to look at kind of trauma and then resilience. And then Yaakov obviously does this deception to his father and brother, and even earlier with Esav not feeding him unless he sells his birthright. There's a lot of kind of violence, but a lower level of violence then, right, and at each other. And then finally, he has to flee the potential violence of his brother, who might want to kill him in response to what's going on. So then he enters this household with another male, another patriarch, who is obviously abusive and does mistreatment and deceives, right? And so he has to navigate around that and slowly grow into a man around that as his model. Okay, his first model was a blind, aging father who essentially ignored him and favored his brother because he brought him game and food. It actually says in the Torah that Yitzhak loved Esav because he brought him game to eat. Okay, so this is a boy who didn't feel necessarily loved or seen by his father, enters a household with an uncle who is overbearing and unpleasant and unethical. And then it has to kind of learn and navigate, what does it mean to be a man, that I'm not going to perpetuate this violence, right? Or this fear of violence. Obviously, we'll see what's coming, unfortunately, with 11 of his sons. Oh, it's heavy. It's very heavy, right? Of what's going on in these parashiot. Okay, so I'm just going to close with saying that the one positive thing I want to point out about Yaakov is his ability in that moment at 17 to say, I didn't know. The words coming from his lips, I don't know. It's so important in our Mussar mindfulness practice to be able to be humble enough to say, I don't know. So he actually says to himself, God is here in this place and I didn't know. You know, it could have gone the other way. He could have pretended that he knew, right? Or he could have been like, I don't believe this. I'm not listening to this. There's lots of different reactions that could have happened. But there's something very powerful when the human being when can we experience God, the divine, Hashem being closest to us? It's when we can say, I don't know, right? It's when we don't pretend wisdom and insight into either a situation or experience, that we're open to the embodied experience of it. And if anyone has to live that way, it's Yaakov. He is so much someone who only learns through experience and what is thrown at him. So with that, Let's move into our guided practice. I will lead us in a guided mindfulness meditation practice where we're going to do something special today and look through the practices of what we call RAIN, R-A-I-N, of how we might be triggered or not. So I invite you now to assume one of the meditative postures. It could be lying down, it can be sitting, it can be walking meditation, and it can be standing, whatever is most comfortable for you, what is safest. If you are going to sit, I invite you to really ground your feet into the ground, really hold them there and feel them. You can even move your toes right now like this to know that you are here, you're between heaven and earth. It's like we're with that sulam, that ladder of Yaakov right now. And we're somewhere in between the ladder. We're noticing these angels going up and down. We want to be here. We want to be present. So with that, I invite you to close your eyes if you have vision. Otherwise, if you don't feel safe enough or you don't have vision, you can just lower your gaze. And we're going to start with 3 deep cleansing breaths. Inhalation, inviting in ease. Exhalation, arriving slowly. Inhalation, inviting compassion. And exhalation, beginning to really settle and arrive, letting go of all tension. And our last great inhalation, the gift of oxygen. And exhalation. I invite you to invite awareness. You can quietly, verbally say that to yourself. I'm inviting awareness. I'm inviting being here and right now in the present moment. You'll allow your breath to fall to its own natural rhythm. We're going to take this first few minutes to really just be here in silence and offering an accepting open-hearted presence. Allow whatever primary emotion is activated inside of you, allow it to be here, recognize it. So for some of you, there might be a primary emotion and reaction or response to this parsha, to this Torah portion, to Yaakov, maybe to my sharing, or maybe whatever primary emotion is for you right now, it might be just something else that's going on in your own life. Sitting with this and recognizing it in silence. Allowing yourself to recognize whatever your situation is, to get in touch with the most challenging part of whatever is happening with you, whether it be emotions, sensations in the body, or thoughts, the storytelling that we can begin to get entranced in. What is the primary emotion or thought or sensation that is activated in you right here and right now? Bring your loving and wise, compassionate attention to whatever feels most difficult and whatever you have recognized. And this time with the intention of fully letting it be. Allowing is the willingness to pause, to stay present with the life that is here just as it is. Allowing difficult emotions or even thoughts or sensations to be present requires gentleness and tenderness. You can gently say to yourself, this too. Yes, I can hold this. This is about opening to our experience even when it is painful or uncomfortable or unpleasant. We move into inquiring our felt sense of our experience. We want to move from a cognitive analytical process out of our head, out of our brain, into the felt experience. And while your stories and beliefs can be a portal to this experience, we want to direct our attention to the body, to the felt sense and sensations of where we feel most vulnerable. Bring an interested and kind attention to your experience. I will offer you the following questions to help you in your investigation. What is the worst part of this? What most wants your attention? What difficult or painful thing are you believing? What emotions does this bring up, such as fear or anger or grief? Where do I feel the emotions inside? What is the actual felt sense of these emotions as sensations, such as clenched, raw, hot, sore, aching, empty, squeezed? Allow yourself to assume the facial expression and body posture that reflect the feelings and emotions. You can curl down, make faces, don't worry, no one's looking at you. Assume the posture for just 1 minute of how it feels inside. As we transition to our nurturing and our non-identification, we stay connected with the vulnerable experience inside. Know that we are asking and listening from compassionate presence. If the most vulnerable part of you could communicate, what would it express? Words, feelings, images. How does this part want you to be with it? What does this part most need from you or from some larger source of love and wisdom? Take this time now to breathe consciously and adjust your posture in a way that helps you fully contact your most awake heart and your wise spirit, what we sometimes call the high or future self. Call on any wise or compassionate being if you cannot turn to yourself right now, whose wisdom and love you trust. It can be a friend, family member. It can be God. It can be a pet, a teacher, a spiritual figure. Offered inwardly now the love, the acceptance, the forgiveness, the compassion, the protection that the vulnerable part of you needs right now. Feel free to extend care through touch if you need to touch your chest or hold your face, or even imagery of seeing your inner child surrounded by light. As we complete this nurturing and non-identification, sense if there's a message that your most awake and wise heart will be helpful for you to remember. Allow yourself to experience the awareness of what might have shifted for you when you began this meditation practice today. What did you experience or learn about yourself that you want to remember? And when you are ready, you can gently and slowly open your eyes if they were closed, to come back into this shared sacred Zoom space and on live streaming together on our YouTube channel, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and here on Zoom. Welcome. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your sponsorships and donations to allow us to provide and offer this awakening each week with our community and to the world at large, so that we may practice and learn from Mussar Mindfulness together. I'm Rabbi Chasya, the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar. Thank you today. I look forward to seeing you next Sunday, Bezrat Hashem, at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. Take care of yourselves. Thank you again.